Okay, great. So good morning once again, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. As I said, my name is Jeremy Coates, and I'm the lead of the program from the Institute of International Education side. We really appreciate everyone who's come out today to listen to some of the findings by our Research and Evaluation and Learning team here at IIE. Before we get started, we're joined today by Claudia Fratelli, who is the Program Officer for the Higher Education Research in Africa group at Carnegie Corporation in New York, and we work, of course, very closely with her on this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Claudia to say a few words.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, everyone, for coming. I also want to thank all of you who have responded to the alumni survey. It's a great way of us learning about the program and how to shape it going forward. So you are all the beneficiaries and you are key to the program. So we really appreciate your participation. And I just wanted to mention that the program, the Carnegie Africa Diaspora Fellowship Program, was renewed by our board in September for another 2 years. So a lot of that is due to you and your responses to the survey, which is, we take very seriously. How are you experiencing the program? So your continued input and participation is really valued. We are also planning in this new cycle to have an alumni convening, which Jeremy will probably be telling you more about, but this is another opportunity. We now have over 400 alumni of the program, and it's an opportunity for you to share your views on the program as well as, higher education in Africa, policy. So that's going to be an exciting opportunity, and we hope you tell your colleagues as well about that. Something else that is happening is a forum on the Africa diaspora, which is in partnership with the African Union. That's coming up on November 13th and 14th. And this is an opportunity for the program leaders of this program, as well as some of the other diaspora programs we've supported, to come together with policymakers. We have several ministers attending and potentially a prime minister who is going to has been very supportive of diaspora engagement. And this is an opportunity to share with policymakers what are some of the findings of these programs, how are they contributing to national development, and really what is the value for African governments to consider supporting engagements with the African diaspora. So those are a couple of things I just wanted to tell you about.
Great, thank you, Claudia. And we'll share some more details toward the end of the webinar about some of the changes, the innovations that we've included in this renewal, and a lot of great opportunities for alumni. So to go ahead and get us started, before I turn it over to our Research, Evaluation, and Learning team, as Claudia said, we're at about 400 fellowships that we've awarded so far. And you can see here on this first slide some of the breakdowns in demographics between public and private institutions, as well as where most of our fellows are going. You can, of course, access the website and see a full list of all of the projects that we've funded so far, and we're happy to share out those links as well. But as you can tell, the most popular area is education, with, I think, engineering and medical sciences following closely behind that. But with that, let's get into some of the results from the pilot alumni follow-up surveys with our monitoring evaluation officer, who's joining us today in the DC office, Alessandra Hodgelik.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that kind introduction. As Jeremy said, I am Alessandra Hodgelik, and I serve as the Monitoring and Evaluation Officer for the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program. And I'm representing the Research, Evaluation, and Learning team here at IIE. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Mirka Martel, who serves as the head of our department, and she's on the line and will be happy to answer any questions as we go. Our department works alongside of the program team, alongside of Jeremy, for example, to help capture the impact of the program and evaluate some of your successes. So what this looks like on regular program cycles is those pre and post surveys that you regularly get asked to complete. And I would like to echo Claudia's thanks in your support in completing those surveys over the years. We really appreciate being able to track your successes through the different survey opportunities. And what I'm really excited to present today is some of the findings from our publicly available impact report, Investing in Diaspora Exchanges. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm really going to take the time to highlight some of your accomplishments and your achievements, and I invite you to read the report. I have the link there, and I think we will circulate the link later as well, so you can see them in more depth later. So this past year's impact study came at a strategic point in the program's lifespan. As Jeremy showed earlier, the program has been running since 2013. So we wanted to take a moment about 5 years into program administration to reflect on the impact you all have been having on African institutions and through your continued collaborations. So using our continuous monitoring and evaluation efforts, those pre and post surveys that I mentioned earlier, we were able to identify 4 thematic areas that we wanted to explore further in our impact study. And these are summarized as continued collaborations, or how did the connections that the program helped foster remain sustainable after that initial intervention? Professional networks, or how did the program foster new connections between academics? Engagement with African higher education, or how did fellows and hosts remain engaged with their projects or take on new projects after the fellowship? And finally, impacts on higher education institutions, or how have the collaborative projects between hosts and fellows strengthened the work of international institutions? So to evaluate these main evaluation and research questions, we launched a mixed methods impact evaluation about this time last year. So for any of the alumni fellows on the line, you might remember being asked about almost a year ago exactly to fill out an alumni survey. And again, thank you for taking the time to do it. We were able to achieve a representative sample in terms of both demographics and program type. So we were really excited about that, and we appreciate all of your support. We supplemented our quantitative source of data with some qualitative follow-up, and what that looked like in terms of this study were 11 different interviews that were administered to both hosts and fellows. We were very careful to ensure demographic representation. As you can see, all 6 different host countries are represented. And we also wanted to make sure that we demonstrated the breadth of the program by including cohort fellowships, multi-institutional fellowships, and of course, alumni fellowships. We also were able to leverage your survey responses to be able to identify candidates for these interviews that really spoke to our evaluation themes. So without further ado, I'd like to turn away from our methodology and move over to the findings. Fully detailed in our report, our study found 3 key findings. First, the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship Program enables sustainable collaborations between diaspora scholars and African higher education institutions while fostering the opportunity for new collaborations. Second, the fellowship strengthened the capacity of African higher education institutions by increasing curriculum offerings, graduate programming, and research production. And then third, the fellowship enabled knowledge production, generated interest, and fostered international collaborative networks, increasing visibility engagement with African higher education overall. So these are obviously very high-level findings, and I'm going to use the next few slides to break that down into what that looks like in a more concrete manner. And you'll probably recognize some of the survey questions that you were asked to do. So first, with sustainability, we wanted to examine how hosts and fellows remained engaged after the initial intervention. And for some fellows, they had completed the intervention, their fellowship 5 years previous, which means that they maybe hadn't had a Carnegie-funded opportunity to collaborate in 5 years. But we were really excited to see that communication remained regular, and it also was centered around collaborations. So with regular communication, we were interested in who fellows remained communicating with. And in terms of monthly or more communication, you can see that the biggest draw was with host colleagues. but about half of fellows still talk to host students on a monthly or more basis, which is really important for those longer-term engagements with students, which we'll go into a little bit more later. In terms of collaborations, we wanted to see what kind of activities continue to engage fellow and host interests after the fellowship. And research, of course, was still a primary draw. You can see 61% were interested in research. But what we were pretty interested to find is that about half of fellows and hosts continue to work together on faculty mentorship. Now, this isn't one of the primary subject areas for fellowship projects to begin with, so it was very exciting to us to see that this was a longer-term impact that was still being maintained after the fellowship. In this impact study, we weren't only looking at how fellows remained engaged with hosts, we also wanted to look at the broader picture, how fellows continue to engage with African institutions overall. So we also asked, how is the fellowship important for fostering connections with African institutions in general? And this was pretty exciting to us. We found that 72 fellows, which was just over half of our sample, said that the fellowship was important for fostering connections with over 100 African institutions that were not their hosts. But what is also really interesting about this finding and key for us is that these collaborations spanned across 16 different countries. As you remember, the fellowship itself is only offered, the previous fellowship, the pilot fellowship, was only offered in 6 different countries. So this really demonstrates the ripple effect of the fellowship and how it expanded across the continent as a whole. We also wanted to see how fellows remained engaged in terms of repeat continued visits. And we had found that 70% travel to Africa within the past year, and these are outside of funded Carnegie visits. We also appreciated your feedback in trying to determine what makes a collaboration more sustainable, or what leads to these more sustainable collaborations overall. And the key areas that fellows highlighted in the survey was first, continued visits. Continued visits were important, as one case study demonstrated, which was a case study between Jean Rudat and Caroline Kimasit at the University of Kaibanga. When in the initial fellowship, often there are benchmarks that continue beyond the initial intervention. So maybe a research publication that is submitted for review but hasn't been accepted quite yet, or curriculum that is in the process of being developed and it needs to continue after. And the continued visit helps fellows and hosts to check up on those benchmarks and make sure the goals are being achieved in a timely manner. Another way is the first visit could serve as a sort of needs assessment to see where institutions really needed more support from the fellow. So the second visit could be redirected in that area that was of more target need for the host institution. And these factors closely align with the other 2 areas that you identified, which were institutional need and institutional support. These areas also worked in tangent with each other. The idea was host institutions that needed the fellow skill set that complemented the host institution, and host institutions that had the support to implement the interventions that the collaborations that fellows were proposing, led to more sustainable change, which is also reflected within this quote, where you can see the complementarity is an incredibly important part of these longer-term collaborations. Moving on from sustainability, we also wanted to see how the fellowship led to stronger institutional capacities overall. And you can see that fellows saw the greatest impact in the area that was highest contact for them. So in their host department, they were able to observe a great positive impact And what was exciting is how the impact has begun to ripple out to the institution as a whole, but then also other African institutions. And in this time, it's important to remember that this was a 5-year impact study. It wasn't 10 years down the line. It was a strategic point to observe these medium to longer term impacts, but being able to see how these impacts have rippled out in even a shorter time frame was pretty impressive for us. But again, this is kind of a summary of what impact was. So let me break this down into more concrete indicators, the ones that we observed that you were kind enough to share with us. First, in terms of curriculum co-development, one of the primary goals of the project is to increase curricula offerings for more advanced degrees. So in post-fellowship collaborations, this is in addition to the 2 or 3 courses that usually fellows estimate being completed in one fellowship project. So this is after that fellowship, within the 5 years, an additional 109 curricula were developed as a collaboration between fellows and hosts, which have led to 41 approved or implemented courses. We also asked you to describe these courses for us, and we were pleased to see that many of them were advanced degrees, which means that the program was speaking to that target goal area, such as the degrees that are listed here. And if you're interested to see what other courses have been approved or implemented or are in progress, I would invite you to please look at the report where it's detailed in more in completion. We also wanted to see how fellows had an impact, how the graduate student teaching and mentoring had an impact on their host institutions and other institutions. So remember, 50% of fellows continued to interact with students on a monthly or more basis in the 5 years after their fellowship. So this translated to about 250 additional students being taught and about 300 students being mentored. Why this is important, this continued engagement, but also the engagement in the initial intervention, was really well summarized in a case study between Professor Zume and Marawa at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. Professor Marawa emphasized that when students are able to work with the fellow, they're getting this hands-on practical experience that they can apply in their research and inspire students to co-present, co-write, and get themselves out there, really investing in human capital. And in this case in particular, it also had forced the university to examine their own teaching practices, and they developed a committee to see how they could incorporate a more practical hands-on approach into their everyday teaching as well. And for Professor Zume, he continues to remain engaged with the students at the University of Cape Coast through virtual means, through WhatsApp, but also making sure that they get the most up-to-date guidance that he can give them on their current projects. And finally, in terms of collaborative research, is one of the other primary focuses of the program. We first looked at how the fellowship had improved policy and practice, and 76% of fellows did report improvements. And what this translated as was hosts had explained that fellows had set up new procedures or protocols to encourage better practices, and often these better practices were around publications or getting to global outlets. So as an example of what this might look like in practice, I'd like to direct your attention to a different case study, which this one highlights the collaborations between Professors Kakuru and Makoba at the University of Technology and Management, or the Uganda Technology and Management University, sorry. And this fellowship project initially was not about publications or research protocols, but while Professor Makoba was on the ground, he identified a higher level administrator's goal of launching an open access journal. And he provided some of the necessary manpower to helped launch the journal and served as the first editor-in-chief. And why was this important? As Professor Kukuru explained, it gave a pipeline to student publication and gave a greater access to peer-reviewed journals overall, which was really important for students to have access to publication, cut some of that bureaucratic red tape. We also wanted to see how fellowship interventions had encouraged greater research production, collaborative research production first. So we asked first how many respondents since the initial intervention had published with their host institution, and found that 39 have been published, which translated into over 100 workshops and about 70 academic articles. But since we also wanted to, the goal indicator was greater production overall, we also included production that came with other African institutions, which in total translated to over 150 different collaborative workshops and seminars, and over 110 academic articles and book chapters, and 27 reports, which I know that with all of you alumni on the line, I'm pretty impressed with the progress that you have made and the work that you have done. And if you are interested in seeing some of the articles, some of the citations, they're included in a one-pager document that I believe will be circulated, or the full report, which you can get to from that link. And this is one of these co-publications, co-authorships are really exciting for us, and it's something that we hope to measure more fully in the future monitoring and evaluation efforts. So if there's a citation that you publish with your host, please feel free to let us know if we missed any, but also just take a look at what some of your colleagues are up to. It's pretty exciting. And then we also wanted to see how new research engagements had been fostered. So 40% of respondents have collaborated with African institutions on approximately 50 collaborative proposals. Most of these proposals were based on research or curricula from the fellowship project, and others had expanded beyond, taking on new topics or new areas of interest. So far, 7 of these have been funded, and for a total of $375-ish thousand. And what these different proposals look like are, there's some examples here. These also can be found in the appendix of the report, and some examples are found in a one-pager document but you'll also have access to this PowerPoint if you're interested in seeing more. Again, this is a small sampling of your work, and we are hoping to more fully capture this in future. In addition to those collaborative proposals, we were also interested to see how fellows had taken on new projects to strengthen the capacity at African institutions or to further encourage engagement. And we found that about 23 of you have been funded for over $1 million, and this is what the different funded proposals look like, what the activities included. And of course, again, research was a primary focus, as it has been consistently throughout this presentation, but we were also really excited to see that 43% of this funding was specifically dedicated to graduate student or faculty mentorship, which again encourages that investment in human capital. We also were interested in how fellows continue to strengthen the capacity of African institutions or African higher education through their follow-up projects or research, and 37 journal articles have been published by fellows on these topics since their exchanges. As you all know, one of the other ways that people remain engaged in academic projects are through institutional linkages and these professional networks. So this was another thing we tried to capture in our report. And about 2/3 of respondents found that observed improvements in their hosts' ability to set up new collaborations with other institutions. And in the interviews with hosts, we leveraged their knowledge to try to understand what this might have meant. And there were 3 different key areas that both hosts and fellows identified. And one is that the fellows' pre-existing network was very important to make these institutional collaborations. So when a fellow came in with prior connections to other institutions, those networks were expanded on the host initial network, encouraging further linkages. Another really important and exciting way that these networks were developed was in sharing fellowship projects. So for example, one case study, a host, Martina Azima, Professor Azima, emphasized how curriculum developed with the fellow was shared with other local institutions, other local universities to help strengthen their capacity, but also form that connection that is now flourishing and active. And then finally, through new active linkages. And new active linkages were in more support or funding being diverted to advancement and linkages units, or just more institutional support from administrators, which is a key barrier that linkages are constantly working against. Another way new institutional linkages were created were by forming connections between the Fellows host institution and the Fellows North American institutions. 35 of these 47 links were new, which means that most of them have been developed since fellowship completion. And the activities often related to new collaborative research projects, but also student exchanges and other teaching exchanges. So to put the new engagements and productions into context, I'd like to turn your attention to one of our other case studies where we highlighted the work of Phil in the last few years, who is at the University of Alberta. And this is an example of why collaborative and continued research is important. Phil's case study is interesting because for her, the importance of the fellowship wasn't only the connection that she made with her host institution. In fact, for her, the greater gain was the connections that she made with other academic institutions. So while she was in her fellowship, she found that having the clout of Carnegie, the prestige of that grant, really helped her to get in the door with important and influential people that made lasting connections with Codestria, with other real important institutions that she continued to foster after her return back to Canada. And she also has been able to leverage support from her home institution of the University of Alberta to keep these connections going and really enrich the networks of these people that she was connected with. So, for example, when she has conferences that are hosted by the University of Alberta or conferences that she's a part of organizing, she prioritizes funding the travel or the engagement from the people that she made, the connections that she made during her fellowship project. But in addition to these academic collaborations, engagements, we also wanted to see how the wider community was engaged through the fellowship projects. So first, we looked at student engagement, which we mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of graduate student teaching and mentorship. But one way that the fellowship project really encouraged students is that fellows' interactions, their direct work with students inspired them to continue their advanced degrees or continued studies. This was a consistent theme that we saw in different host interviews over several years. it was the hands-on experience, so seeing a fellow doing what they wanted to do, that helps them continue forward with their degrees. And this was a major outcome that was consistently identified as one of the most important outcomes for hosts, because the investing in humans, in the human capital of their students, was one of the clearest paths forward they saw for strengthening their institution and their community. Another way was through those workshops and seminars that we mentioned earlier, the over 150 that collaboratively were done between fellows and African institutions. They often weren't only for academic audiences. Instead, they were very frequently administered to local government officials, community members, high school students, and these community presentations were inspired by fellowship research or were part of the initial fellowship project, which demonstrated that direct connection to the community. And finally, by applying the findings of collaborative research, which often focused on capacity building beyond the academic sphere, fellowship projects had the potential to make direct impacts on the community. So as an example, I'd like to direct your attention to our final case study, which highlights the collaboration between Professors Onyago and Katambara at the Mbeya University of Science and Technology. And I apologize, I'm not an engineer, so I might get some of the technical information wrong, but what the fellowship project was focused on is how to make rural roads more sustainable by finding a better binding agent for brick. And the reason why is because in the rural roads in Tanzania, which, as Professor Katambara was kind enough to explain to me, is a great proportion of the roads, they are usually brick or dirt, and they require consistent routine maintenance, and the time that is spent on maintaining roads is time that's taken away from production, from farming, from community strengthening. So this project was incredibly important for having roads that require less of this routine maintenance. And what was exciting for us to observe is that this was directly applied in the community because Professor Katambara the team presented at a local exhibition for construction. And these exhibitions are used to inspire direct interventions and new innovations. So that was a very clear example of how the projects that people are taking on are directly applied for the community as a whole. So anyway, this has been a high-level overview of the report, some of the amazing things that you've been up to in the last 5 years or more. I encourage you to read the entire report to take stock in your accomplishments and the accomplishments of your colleagues. But I have enjoyed being able to share some of the things that I have found most exciting about your work. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor to you with any questions or considerations about what I have just presented, or I guess back to Jeremy if you have any questions or considerations for him, or Claudia as well.
Maybe the chat box, go ahead and use the chat box if you have questions or comments about Alessandra's presentation. Thank you, Alessandra, for all your hard work on this. Yeah, it's exciting to see all of the results from the fellows and the hosts. So just a note, while we're waiting for any of you to give us comments or questions, is that after this presentation, we will be sending out a link to a YouTube video as well as a PDF of this presentation. And Alessandra has also put together a one-pager that kind of outlines some some of the more interesting results from the study. Well, they're all interesting, but some of those that you might like to share around. And also on the back of that, or the second page, it's really a two-pager now, but front and back. But on the second page, there's a list of publications that have gone out by hosts and fellows based on these project visits. So you can get an idea of, some of the work that, as Alessandra said, that some of your colleagues are doing together. So looks like we have one question if you want to.
And about that list, I just wanted to emphasize that was a small sampling of your work. So what I said earlier for missing any citations, we are absolutely missing them.
Feel free to send them in, actually, when you see the list and you don't see your citation on it. Feel free to send it in as well, and we can add it.
So our question is, how do alumni reach colleagues to promote the program on campus?
So I guess that's more of a question for the program team side. Some of the best ways, you are our best ambassadors for outreach activities, especially given that identifying the African academic diaspora is not necessarily an easy task, because you're spread out at all different institutions and different departments, and so it's not always the easiest to identify everyone. So we do rely on our alumni to spread the word. We can of course provide you with some materials to forward to your colleagues who might be eligible for the program. So if you email us at africandiaspora@iie.org, we can send you an announcement. Plus, we have a number of how to apply webinars for fellows as well as for hosts to listen in on. We've recorded them and we posted them on YouTube, so you can get more information about whether you're a potential fellow or a potential host on how to apply for the program. Now, one thing too is spreading the word to your colleagues on the continent in our 6 countries. We are working, as I'll restate again, in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. Both private and public accredited institutions in these countries. We have expanded to 3 additional universities in this cycle, those that are part of the ARUA network. But reaching out to them, please do send us their email addresses or make a connection to us via the africandiaspora@iie.org inbox, and we can send them more details. So with that, there's another question that just came through for Alessandra, but let me say that all of you as alumni can learn more about how to spread the word about the program, as well as opportunities for you. You received a notification, I believe a week and a half ago, for an alumni webinar where we will discuss these different opportunities in more detail. So I'll bring that up at the end of the call, and if you need that link, please email us at africandiaspora@iie.org, and we can share that with you. Apologies, that webinar is next week on the 24th. But back to you, Alessandra.
So we just had a new question that as many capacity building efforts have focused on fellows and host students, is there an effort to build capacity of local faculty who can later sustain fellowship initiatives? And so this is something that I was kind of hinting at earlier, that the primary fellowship goals are the curriculum co-development, graduate student teaching and mentorship, and collaborative research. But what has been really exciting for us is how building the capacity, strengthening the capacity of local faculty is an outcome, whether or not this is one of the main focus points or not. So for example, almost all of sustained communication, 71% of monthly communication or 71% of fellows continue to communicate monthly with local faculty. And often the reason for that are different mentorship opportunities, such as sharing resources, sharing guidance, offering peer review. Also those workshops and seminars that occurred post-fellowship, but also workshops and seminars that occur during the intervention are often attended by faculty or are developed alongside a faculty, which gives them more transferable skills as well. And then finally, when we were looking at what activities fellows engage in after, 48% of them continue to mentor faculty, or close to half, which was pretty impressive to us too, that local faculty would have that resource for years to come.
Great. It seems like we have another question for the program team asking if there's a virtual location to contact alumni. There are two ways that you can contact other alumni. You should be part of a listserv. Evelyn, who many of you know, is the program coordinator at the Secretariat at USIU Africa. She manages this large listserv that should have all of you on it. And that's a place where you can reach out to all other alumni, sending out messages and any requests for details, or if you're seeking any additional collaborations. Of course, you can also browse the list of alumni on the website, and if you would like to be put in touch directly with anyone, the names of all of you are listed. Generally, you can look at the names and then find them on their university website and follow up, or we would be happy to make that connection as well, especially if you're looking for, greater collaboration on a project like the CADFP. All right, so we're still taking questions. Do you have any other insights to share, Alessandra? I can go ahead and share a little bit more detail about, the upcoming webinar if
I think that I have comprehensively explained some of my insights, and I am also available by email if you have any follow-up questions at a later date, or just considerations, concerns. We're always open to feedback too on how we've been monitoring and evaluating the program, but I'm happy to turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Alessandra, and to your team, and Mirka, who's also on the call, for all your work on the project. Just a couple more things before we wrapped up. All of you, we really hope you'll join us next week for the alumni webinar. During that webinar, we'll discuss upcoming competitions for the mini grants for conference participation. Many of you have been following up with us directly in email about this opportunity for hosts and fellows to jointly present at academic conferences internationally about the work that was accomplished during their fellowship. Also, one thing I want to mention very specifically on this call, just because if someone can't join and we're trying to get the word out there, Carnegie Corporation funds us for 2 years in a row. So our new grant runs from October to September of 2021. And we are only, in the past, as you know, we've offered 3 application competitions during that time period. But now we are only offering 2. So there are only 2 selection cycles. This one runs, of course, from October to December 9th, October 1st to December 9th. The next one runs from April 1st until, Liz, is it June? Till the end of June. Yes. So until the end of June. That's all right. Yeah, I should have written this down. Till the end of June. So just keep in mind there are only 2 opportunities to apply over this 2-year period, as opposed to 3 as there were in the past. So please do keep that in mind. And then I think Alessandra, one thing that Claudia just mentioned that I think is important in the chat box is that the report, this pilot alumni report, is being shared as background reading at the upcoming November Diaspora Forum in Addis Ababa. So that's a great way to kind of disseminate the impact of this project more widely among a diverse group of stakeholders, from policymakers, academics, and practitioners as well. So, so that's a note she asked us to share.
And the report is publicly available. It's a shareable link, so if you are interested in sharing it with your colleagues as well, please feel free to do so.
Great.
June 30th.
Till June 30th. So April 1st to June 30th is the next application cycle. So as we always tell you, start working on with your hosts, start working with your scholars early. Make sure the letters are on time, and we're excited to continue working with all of you. Sorry, one more reminder is Claudia mentioned the alumni convening that we'll be holding. We did send out a survey for you to complete about that. Please be sure to go in and contribute to that survey. We'll be looking closely at your responses as we start forming the actual convening, and then of course working with all of you to create the content for the meeting. So with that, thank you, and thank you for your contributions.
Thank you for the opportunity to share. Honestly, I just relish the opportunity to share your accomplishments.
Thank you.